Tthe Wolf, readers from YouTube, hello. This is the first episode of my trek through the book of Genesis and eventually, theoretically, the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, each week, spouting strange ideas left and right the whole time. The structure of this journey will be that each week I will be tackling one chapter. I'm going to be starting in Genesis, and I will work through every chapter in Genesis 1 week at a time. Then I will switch to the Gospels, and I'll see what I want to do after that. And eventually I will cover every book of the Bible. So, today we are going to be covering Genesis 1. And so, before recording the video, I will have read the chapter a couple of times, figured out what strange idea I want to make, and then I shall start recording, like I have done right now. And I will read through the chapter, and stop at points in the chapter to talk about specific points of evidence for the argument I'm going to be making that day. Then at the end I will recap the evidence and make sure that the argument that I am making is clear, or at least try to make sure. And I am not necessarily saying that I personally espouse the theories that I am making. I am just throwing out ideas. And if you have good counter evidence to the argument that I make, provide it in the comment section. And if you like the idea, you can roll with it. If you don't like the idea, you don't have to roll with it. It is simply an idea I am throwing out there. Not all of these things are going to be things that I personally believe to be absolutely 100% true. I just think they're interesting and valid interpretations that should be thought about. So, this week, I'm going to try to do a literal interpretation of Genesis 1 that gets us to an old Earth theory. Because, quite simply, there's an awful lot of evidence for the universe being much older than 6,000 years old, or 10,000, or 20,000. And yes, it can all be explained by a miracle, but I feel like it's kind of silly to assume a miracle when you don't have to assume a miracle. So, I'm going to see how good of an argument for an old Earth theory based on the literal interpretation of Genesis 1 I can make. Let us begin. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I'm just going to stop there for a bit of discussion. Yes, I know it's very early. What can be discussed about that? Well, there's two ways to fit this first verse into the rest of the narrative. Either, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, could be the summary of this chapter. And so the rest is just how he created the heavens and the earth. Or it could be taken to be the first event in the story. God created the heavens and the earth, and then he does all this stuff to put it into the form that we see today. And I'm going to go with the latter interpretation of that verse. I think it makes more sense. So, before anything else happens, God creates a thing that is called the heavens and a thing that is called the earth. Now, what are these things like? Now, the earth, was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So the Earth was formless and empty, so it may or may not have had a normal planet-like shape, except for the fact that it says darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So there was waters on Earth, which seems to suggest it was a relatively normal planet-looking planet thing. So, moving on. And God said, "Let there be light," and there is light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there is evening, and there is morning, the first day. So, God makes light, and then we start having a day-night cycle, which seems obvious once you take a look at what the actual definition of a day-night cycle of a day is in modern terms, which is that a day is not like a specific quantity of time. It is simply a cycle of light and dark for a specific region of a planet. So Earth has a 24-hour day-night cycle. It takes 24 hours for light to happen and then day to happen. Venus has a day that is longer than its year. It takes longer to spin around on the other side of the planet and get from the side of the planet from being facing the sun to not facing the sun to facing it again. And it takes for it to go around the sun. And then there's Mercury. Mercury has a day length of infinity because it is tidally locked. It doesn't spin, or at least it doesn't spin to a substantial enough degree to think of it as spinning. The same side is always facing the sun, the other side is never facing the sun. So, at this moment, we have some sort of day-night cycle. But we don't have the Earth orbiting around a sun to give it that day-night cycle. So, we have no good reason to assume that it has a 24-hour period. Now, moving on. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. So we have water now. And once again, we have this day-night cycle with no actual period of time given for that cycle. But we now have clouds in the sky and water below. Moving on. Verse 9. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So we now have dry ground. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. So once again, we have a day-night cycle. And in this case, we kind of have an idea that it might not be feasible to say that there was a 1,000-year-long period of night, since we now know that there are plants. But it could be that there was not so much a difference between noon level of lighting and midnight level of lighting, and the day-night cycle is more of noon level of lighting to sun having just set level of lighting, which would still have been a day and dark. I mean, it says that there was evening and then there was morning, and it says evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, morning throughout the whole thing. So that could be the level of light it was talking about. There's no good reason to assume it was that level, but it's now no longer a simple extension of 24 hours, past the 24-hour period. Though it could still be extended. 14. And God said, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vaults of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. So, a lot of things just happened. We now have a sun, we have a moon, and we have stars! Now, since we have a sun and a moon, we can assume that the Earth is now orbiting around the sun in a normal Earth-like fashion, and we are now on 24-hour day-night cycles. However, if God made the stars on the 4th day, for most of those stars, assuming the timeline of the Bible is correct, the light would not have gotten to us yet. Because if you sum up most of the things in the how we can measure time in the Bible, based primarily on genealogies and things, you get around 6,000 years between then and now. And we can see a whole lot of stars that are more than 6,000 light years away. So that seemed to be a problem. Now there's the idea that God could have just made the light from the stars already on their way. I don't like that. Why? Because once again, why assume a miracle when there doesn't need to be one? Because there's actually a rather interesting answer to this, in my opinion. And that is this. If you take relativity, right, Einstein's theory of relativity, and you try to distill it down to its very basics, what you end up getting is that time and position are relative to the observer. Which means you can't really say that a thing has happened until you see it happen. Which means that from the perspective of the Earth, the stars weren't made until the light, or until that star's light first gets there. So, since God is a timeless being and days don't really mean much to him, he could have created the stars from their own perspective a long, long time ago, since they are in galaxies far, far away. And since the light has made each one at a specific point in time such that their light all gets to Earth at the same time, or not necessarily at the same time, but within the same 24-hour period. i.e. the fourth day. Thus, the speed of light remains constant. We still see all the stars that we see, and no unnecessary miracles have occurred. Moving on to verse 20. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. Okay, so we now have birds and fish. And we are on a day, and we are now on a 24-hour cycle. So, saying that God used evolution to create them still means he would have had to like speed up the evolution in some weird way. So there are ways to make this fit. You can take evolution into account. You can try to make a telling of accounts that doesn't use evolution. Either of those is going to be rather complicated to fit with this and what we see in the fossil record. I don't think it's particularly important. I don't have a good answer for it right now, so I'm not going to say anything about it. There are interesting things to possibly be said on the subject, but I have none of them at the moment. Moving on. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock and the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. So now we have land animals of various sorts. Once again, fitting this into a 24-hour period would be complicated. I don't have a good answer. I don't think it's particularly absolutely important. And so, if you have something interesting to say, you can say something interesting about it, but I have nothing, so I will say nothing. Verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves along the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the ground, of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. There was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So, the basic argument. For the first 3 days, we have no reason to suspect that there was a 24-hour day-night cycle. So, it could have been thousands of years. It could have been millions of years. It could have been billions of years. It could have been trillions of years. And assuming that the cycle of light and darkness fits within a 24-hour normal cycle for us, is an unfounded assumption. And since there's evidence against it, it's an unfounded assumption that makes sense to be dismissed. And so I think we should dismiss it. And there are some ways in which one could in fact fit these periods of day, of light and dark, to specific events and things like that. I mean, at the beginning of the universe it was in fact dark, not because it wasn't hot enough to produce light. It was very hot. It was all of the hot, all of it. So it was producing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of light. But it was also so dense right after the Big Bang, according to the standard model of what happened, that light couldn't get anywhere. Like, literally, there wasn't room for light to happen effectively. And so it took a couple million years for things to spread out and cool down enough that light could actually happen. Maybe that's when the creation of light in the Genesis account. It's a possibility. Before then, there wasn't light, and now there was light. Now, of course, there's the minor problem that Earth couldn't have survived in that circumstance. Well, and even more importantly, the circumstance before light was possible, because that would have just turned the Earth into types of plasma you guys haven't heard, most people haven't even heard of. And so yes, we kind of have to put a miracle in there saying God put a miracle in and prevented the Earth from melting into plasma. But it does explain a lot more of the evidence. This interpretation is still a literal interpretation that explains a lot more of the evidence that we see in the universe than the normal literal interpretation. And if you disagree with it, you know, interesting counter arguments to put against my argument, leave them in the comment section. I will try to respond. Maybe if there's enough comments, maybe even make a second video explaining my responses to those comments. Or I might just respond to them in the comments. But it is an idea that I am throwing out. Do with it what you will. Thanks for watching, and until we meet again, farewell.